Okay, I'm working on Gasko Yard. I've changed up the plan completely actually. Before it was just a run around with a couple sidings. I threw a turntable in there and it was kind of hard. I wasn't sure exactly how the traffic was going to go through. So I hope this plan, I think it's a lot better actually. So let's take a look at it. It was inspired by a plan in Model Railroaders, Model Railroad Planning, 2011. This layout right here, it is Stockton and Copperopolis Railroad. Turning the clock back to 1895, I'm not going to go back to 1895, but I was flipping through here, I was straightening up magazines, I just happened to open this page up, and I was really mulling over how I wanted to do this layout, this Gasko Yard here. Just wasn't working out. And I saw this section right here. It is the Holden section of the layout. And as you can see, very similar to mine, I got the dual gauge coming down from the mountain and it splits up. I don't have it exactly like this, it was just an inspiration. It's similar, where I'm still debating if I want the dual gauge going into where the station is. But I have a runaround track here for a passing siding, actually I should say. And I also have a branch off that goes to a coal transfer, because I'm going to need that. Then the red track, splitting off the strictly red track without the hash marks, is the narrow gauge in the front of the yard. And he's got a turntable basically for turning the engines around. Looks like there's one siding for parking an engine. I took this idea and I adapted it to my area. So we'll take a look at it. This is what I came up with. I got my track coming down from the mountain, dual gauge, and it's going to split off here. This is going to be the narrow gauge. There's a runaround. There's my coal transfer from the narrow gauge to the standard gauge. This will be my narrow gauge branch going to the sawmill. Basically this section right here in the old plan, and it'll go to the sawmill. That's where it'll drop the logs off, and this is going to be the pickup. Now originally this branch here I had as dual gauge, and the dual gauge ran, and the runaround and everything was dual gauge. The yard was primarily narrow gauge, and this siding here was standard gauge, but I basically almost flipped the whole idea around, added, basically a transfer yard between the narrow and the standard. I've heard people commenting on some of my old plans saying there basically would be separated, it wouldn't be so much dual gauge. So my dual gauge still comes down from the mountain, same as here, comes down from the mountain, and then basically almost splits. So it's separate, narrow gauge, and this whole area here is standard gauge. There's my runaround passing siding. I'll have a station here. This track is the coal transfer, from the narrow coal transfer over to the standard coal transfer there. Also, I'll probably have a couple more industries, maybe just a building or two along here. This will be almost like a baggage track. I'm debating if I want the dual gauge to strictly run along this, I guess yard's what you call it, and then just have the dual gauge go into the baggage track in case I want to have passenger cars on the narrow gauge. They can get loaded up here and that would almost act as the platform for the narrow gauge passengers, where the standard gauge would stay on the passing siding area with the station here and then walk down. I'm debating if I want to do that. Give me some comments on that. This would stay strictly standard. The whole passing siding would stay standard. Instead of just splitting right here, it would dual gauge strictly up to this baggage track. Then all the rest again would stay the same. I did change this up a little bit, this section. Instead of having an S curve in this spot right here, I flipped the turnout around so it's a right-handed turnout. So it branches off and goes right into this turntable here. 9 or 10 inch turntable probably, so it can handle most of the smaller steam engines, the geared engines. Should handle it fine. I can have tracks coming off for maintenance away cars. This will be a 2-stall engine shed. Again, more storage tracks for engines if I wanted to. I won't have a way of turning around my standard gauge engines. They'll strictly stay in the directions that they are. I can store them in the back. I can have 3 one direction, 3 the other direction, however it works out. But unfortunately I don't have a Y or a reversing loop anywhere on this for the standard gauge. Here's the 1-to-1 printout from X-Track CAD. Again, coming down the mountain will be dual gauge. Right at this curved turnout, this would be where the split is. Branch goes up to the standard gauge, going to the passing siding and passenger station. Again, debating if I want to make this dual gauge up through here and then going into the baggage track. This is the line going up through the to the coal transfer. And along this whole line I would have other industries, maybe 1 or 2 other buildings to drop cars off, box cars or whatever it might be. And then this area would be the coal transfer. The narrow gauge track here on the coal transfer section, I would raise up as high as I can get, just so that I can have the coal drop out and have a neat little trestle here. This section of that track would be a probably 3%, maybe even slightly over 3% grade, just so I can push a couple cars up with the engine. The gear loco should handle that no problem. Even if I get 3 cars up there, however it works out. But from this section here to this section, I'd have it almost level. I could even make that shorter just to ease the grade a little bit. This whole section again would be the turntable and the runaround track for the narrow gauge. Again, this section is where I would reverse this turnout. Right now it's a left-handed turnout. I'll make it a right-handed turnout and put it at the curve section here so that it comes off straight towards the turntable. The turntable, this drawing here, once I actually laid it out on the plywood, I'm going to bump it out probably about another inch or 2. That's why I added a little bit more wood on the plywood from my original plan, because this section actually didn't exist up until tonight. I added this section on. Comes out about another foot where this end of the curve is, and I use a jigsaw just to ease the curve. That didn't exist. The original plans in the past stopped at this piece of plywood here, ran straight down. With this whole revised plan, I bumped this out, added it on, leveled it all up. I still have to screw it down permanently, but it should work pretty fine. Tell me what you think about the new Gasko Yard. Feedback is greatly appreciated. If you can think of any improvements, please put them in the comments below. Email me any way of getting those comments to me. I'd appreciate it. I want this yard to work great. I don't have to rip it up, a couple months later and say, man, this just didn't work out. But I like this plan a lot better than my old plan, definitely. keeping the gauges separate is a great idea. I forget who suggested that in a couple of the forums, but thank you. I've been mulling over this forever, and I think this will work out pretty well. If you see any areas that I could add, maybe a storage track or two, again, I do want to keep some areas for building, structure, scenery. That's very important to me. So I did, this is going to be a transfer freight yard or freight building station here. That'll be a regular passenger station over there. All right, guys. Thanks for watching.